Welcome back into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jen and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. Sap, the NBA Finals is tied at 1 game apiece after the opening salvo in Golden State. The series is going to shift now to Boston. The Celtics do have home court advantage, but they do not have momentum as they are absolutely run out of the gym in Game 2. Final score was Golden State 107, Boston 88, and it really wasn't even that close at all. The Celtics had their patented third quarter meltdown, Sap, losing the quarter 35-14. And Golden State now can feel really good about where they are, I think, after losing a frustrating game 1 by melting down the fourth quarter. I feel like they can look at it and say, hey, if we didn't melt down that fourth quarter, we could have a 2-0 lead. And the Celtics it seemed like they almost punted away this game in the second half, Sap.
The 2 games of this finals so far, the Celtics have been outscored 73-38 in the third quarter. It's nearly a 2-1 margin. Look, Golden State's always been great in the third quarter. The last 8 years, this is something that I saw every time they play Cleveland in the finals. Whatever it is, whether it's Steve Kerr making adjustments at halftime or the fact that Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green have played so many games together that they can kind of make adjustments on the fly. 73-38 in the third quarter of the first 2 games of this series is problematic. The biggest problem, though, Jet, turnovers. Once again, turnovers, and that's been an Achilles heel of the Celtics throughout this postseason. When they keep it under 13 in turnovers, they win. When it's 13 or more, they lose. Well, last night they had 19 turnovers, 7 in the first quarter when I thought they were in control of the game with a 9-point lead. If they take care of the basketball better in the first quarter, maybe they build that lead up to 15, 16 points. Instead, they're down 1 going into the second quarter after Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum combined for 26 first quarter points. So it's about turnovers. And also among those turnovers, we're talking about live ball turnovers. 15 of the 19 turnovers were live ball turnovers, meaning Golden State had 15 steals. Golden State turned that into 33 points. That was the biggest difference in the game. Take care of the basketball. You've got a better chance to win. And I always push back on the notion that, well, they got the split in San Francisco. The problem with that is we've seen in the last 2 series, the Celtics have not played well at home. They're 3-4 over the last 2 series against Milwaukee and Miami. I will almost guarantee you that Golden State's going to win one of these next 2, or if they have to come here and win game 6, they're going to get a win at TD Garden because Golden State has won a road playoff game in 29 consecutive series. They're certainly good enough and experienced enough to win on the road. And the Celtics, quite frankly, over the last 2 series have not been good at home. They're going to have to win another game in San Francisco if they want to win this title. They had an opportunity last night. I know the final score was 107-88, and the lead was up to 29 early in the fourth quarter. But the Celtics had an opportunity in the first quarter to take hold of that game and put a lot of pressure on Golden State, but the turnovers absolutely killed them. And, oh, by the way, you had 3 starters, each scored 2 points. Marcus Smart, Rob Williams, and Al Horford each scored 2 points. You're not winning games with that lack of production.
Yeah, those guys were really bad in the game, especially after game 1, where Al Horford and Marcus Smart really shined, and Rob Williams was more effective too, certainly in that game. But yeah, those guys are really bad, and obviously the story of the game is turnovers, without a doubt. You can't win a game against Golden State when you're just spotting them possessions and spotting them points. As we talked about before the series and after game 1, Sap, that they are a front-running team and they can absolutely pile on you. And the Celtics allowed them to do what they do best, which is get momentum and then just absolutely pile on the scoreboard to the point where the Celtics were down, I think, 30 at one point, Sap. Just absolutely blow the Celtics out of the building. And I think a lot of the issue with the turnovers is just it's a lack of concentration and a lack of effort. The same sort of thing we saw in the Miami series that hurt the Celtics. If you do that against Golden State like they did last night, you're going to get blown out. You're not going to be able to keep it close. You know, Miami is offensively challenged. Golden State certainly is not. And even with Klay Thompson shooting terribly from the floor, Golden State still has enough offensive weapons to be able to blow you out of the gym like they did last night. So, you know, the Celtics, I think, can point to themselves and say, we need to concentrate more. We need to not be giving Golden State these turnovers. Listen, some of the plays that Golden State made to turn the ball over are good defensive plays, without a doubt. You can't just say, okay, the Celtics had all these turnovers and they were all self-imposed. That's obviously not the case, but a lot of them were, and those are the ones that you can't excuse. Listen, if Draymond Green's going to make a great defensive play, you can tip your cap to him. He made a great defensive play. But when you're throwing the ball cross court and it's a lazy pass, or when Marcus Smart's at the top of the key and throws a bounce pass that's off by 5 feet, those are mistakes that you can't afford to make. And it's not anything that Golden State's doing. That's stuff that's an unforced error that you're doing. And the Celtics did that far too often last night, Sap. In addition to that, and I do want to preface this by saying I agree with you. The turnovers were the biggest problem in this game for the Celtics. They cannot win when they turn the ball over like that. I do think that it's worth mentioning the first quarter, the officiating was horrible on the Celtics end, and I know I'm the Celtics honks app, and maybe you'll disagree with me here, but the Celtics got out to a good start, and I thought the officiating, they got about three terrible calls in a row, and I thought that sapped all, no pun intended, all momentum away from the Celtics with the really poor officiating. And then from there, the Celtics did a lot of shooting themselves in the foot and getting frustrated and making bad turnovers. But I do think that the poor officiating in the first quarter did have an impact on the game going forward. The biggest reason the Celtics lost is because of the turnovers, without a doubt. But I do think it's worth noting that in the first quarter, the officiating did have a role in why the Celtics sort of grinded down to a halt.
Jaylen Brown's in his sixth year. Marcus Smart's in his eighth year, and Jason Tatum is in his fifth year. They have to learn to fight through that. Okay. Look, Jaylen Brown got off to a great start last night. He seemed to be at a different level early in the game. He was 4 of 6 from the floor early. Jason Tatum was on fire as well. They each scored 13 points in the first quarter. And again, they were still trailing by 1 because of all those turnovers. Once that second foul call was called against Jaylen Brown, and to me, it was a phantom call. It was a poor call. He just kind of got beside himself. At that point, he was 4 for 6. After that, he was 1 for 11 the rest of the way. Now, I'll also give some credit to Draymond Green. This is a 2-time Defensive Player of the Year, a guy who's not quite the defensive player he was, say, 3, 4, 5 years ago, but he's still really good. And from that point forward, Jaylen Brown was a no-show. Again, 1 for 11 from the floor after that second foul call against him. And Tatum kind of got out of sorts as well. Andrew Wiggins is going to be locked on him a lot. And it's a tough matchup for Tatum because Wiggins is a really good defensive player. Then they used Klay Thompson against Al Horford, which was a really smart move because they're treating Horford as a perimeter player, not an interior player. Maybe you've got to find a way to make Horford pay, make Klay Thompson pay for that by giving up size. But Jaylen Brown's the guy that's going to have to fight through Draymond Green and his shenanigans. And look, Draymond Green, this is what he does. He's in a comfort zone of being an irritant. I know Boston fans already after 2 games hate him, but if he was on your team, you'd love him. He's no different than Brad Marchand of the Boston Bruins or Rodney Harrison when he was with the New England Patriots a decade and a half ago. They're irritants, but they're really good players as well. So Brown, Tatum, Smart, they're going to have to learn to fight through that. This is the way the NBA works, right? You put Zach Zarba out there, the Ed Hockley of NBA referees. This is what you're going to get. But that second foul call against Jaylen Brown was not good. And even the second one against Jason Tatum wasn't good. And it kind of took them out of their game. But you can't let a second foul call get you out of your game. You got to be better than that.
I agree with you. You have to be more mentally tough than that. And I'm sure that's what Coach Udoka is saying to the team. And I think that's a big point. But, in the NBA Finals, you shouldn't have officiating ever come into play prominently. Again, they're going to miss calls. Basketball's hard to officiate. But the Gary Payton, the 3 calls I was talking about it was 2 fouls that Draymond Green drew where he was 100% the initiator, and somehow the Celtics got called for fouls on those. And then the Gary Payton one, or the Gary Payton Jr. one. Just 3 really bad calls, and I think it took the Celtics out of rhythm. And yes, Sap, I think you're right that the Celtics can't allow that sort of stuff to completely rattle them, and that's on them. But the officiating does need to be better, and I do think it had a role in this game, and you hate to see that happen. As far as another officiating point that was going on in this game, Sap, the fans that wanted to see Draymond Green ejected for a second technical after he had that scuffle with Jaylen Brown. I do disagree with them. And listen, Draymond Green's annoying me too. I obviously like him as a player because I like those sort of defensive minded guys. But as a Celtics fan, he's frustrating and irritating to play against. But I don't want to see anybody ejected in the NBA Finals for any reason unless it's just absolutely an egregious, foul where you're trying to hurt somebody else. So, is he officiated differently than other players? Yes. Other players, he does far more that would other players would get a technical way before he ends up getting a technical. But at the same time, I don't feel like we should be determining games or the NBA Finals at all by if a guy gets two technicals for mouthing off to the referee. I just don't see how that's at all something that should come into play.
He did get ejected after a second technical back in the Memphis series, right? In game one, he got thrown out.
Yeah.
And then by game two, Dylan Brooks got thrown out 3 minutes into that game and then got suspended for game three. So they'll do that. So we know Draymond Green has a history of that. And I just have to always push back with when people say, well, Draymond Green got suspended for game 5 of the 2016 finals against LeBron because the league wanted LeBron to win that title. The way that worked was, there's a system of demerits, and it was, flagrant 1, flagrant 2, technical, whatever it may be. And after it adds up to a certain point, you get suspended, right? And that's what happened with Draymond Green in that finals. There was no determination by the league after game 4 of that series to say, you know what, it's 3-1. We got to make sure LeBron wins this title. So let's just arbitrarily suspend Draymond Green for game 5. No, it had built up to that point, right? With flagrant 1s or flagrant 2s or technicals, whatever the system was put in place, he was a violator of that. So that's why he missed game 5 of the 2016 finals. I don't think it went to the point where he and Jaylen Brown were going to get double technicals. I think if that happens earlier in the game and no technicals were handed out, maybe they would have each gotten a technical for that, although I'm not sure what Jaylen Brown did other than just try to defend himself a little bit because, again, Draymond Green, that's what he does. I mean, you're talking about the other foul, too, is where he essentially tackled Grant Williams and somehow Grant Williams got tagged for that foul. And then that's when Green got the technical. This is how he plays. He's still an elite defender, not quite what he was 3-4 years ago. He's going to try to get in everyone's head. And it did work last night because Jaylen Brown was out of sorts really from the second quarter on when Green, his intensity went up a tick and he was getting in Jaylen Brown's kitchen and playing really good defense. So that's what he does. You don't want to see players get thrown out of games without question, but they've already suspended Draymond Green earlier in the postseason for what he did against Memphis and got a second technical and got thrown out of that game in game 1. And Golden State was able to win that one. The key here, that second foul against Jaylen Brown, which again was a phantom call, it just got him out of sorts, but he's got to be better than that because he's a borderline superstar type player. He's got to be better than that.
I agree. I definitely think he has to, overcome that sort of frustration that comes with, Draymond Green being an irritant and the officiating not being great. You can't just say, oh, that happened to me, I'm going to, curl up into a ball and not be an effective player. You definitely can't. So you're right on the money there, Sap. It's frustrating, to see officiating be a factor at all. And again, the bigger thing is the Celtics turnovers and not responding well. I'm airing my grievances, Sap.
Yes.
That's what I'm doing right now. But yeah, I agree. You got to be mentally tougher than that. I did find it funny though, that Steve Javie, who's the officiating czar of ESPN now, former longtime NBA official, essentially was saying that referees look at a thing differently, a call differently if a player already has a technical, which I would assume by the letter of the law isn't the correct way to look at it. A technical, whatever's technical worthy is technical worthy, and in the first quarter should be technical worthy in the fourth quarter. I appreciate that they use, better judgment, but it's funny to hear them say it out loud that they look at things differently when I'm sure the league would have preferred Steve Javie not said that. But, that's neither here nor there. Just something I'm pointing out, Sep.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right. And again, the letter of the law compared to the spirit of the law. You want to avoid throwing people out, but you also want to make sure that players don't go overboard. And look, Draymond Green's been in the league a decade. This is how he makes his living. He knows exactly what he's doing. He knows where to go, as far to go to the limit before he's going to get tossed. And sometimes he's wrong because he's been tossed several times. I mean, it's not like he's got a perfect record on this. He was able to go as far as he could last night. He played excellent defense against Jaylen Brown, and the Celtics just continued to turn the ball over and got down by 29 points with 10 minutes left. And I know there've been some people pushing back on why Ime Udoka took the starters out. I don't see you coming back from 29 points down with 10 minutes left.
No,
I mean,
that
let's
was
not compare
100% the right decision.
Absolutely. Just you guys suck tonight. Go sit down. Let the scrubs get in there. We've got another game coming up Wednesday. You know, I don't want to get you guys gassed or hurt or whatever the case may be. Like game one to game two, the comebacks would have been totally different. Game one's comeback was a 12-point deficit going into the fourth quarter. That is a makeable deficit without question. We saw them come back and actually win the game by 12. 29 points with 10 minutes left. I mean, unless you're playing make and take, there's no way you come back from that. Right? I mean,
No,
29 points in 10 minutes is impossible. Are the Warriors never going to score again in the rest of the game?
I think it served dual purpose. Step one, you make sure nobody gets hurt, which is obviously the most important factor. You don't want any of your key players or starters getting hurt. And two, I think it made the players sit with it, and which is a good thing. That they have to stew over. Man, we really sucked tonight. We did not put in a good effort, which is true, Sep. In the second half, especially in that third quarter, obviously, they did not put in a sincere effort. They were getting out-rebounded terribly, 50-50 balls. They were not competing. And that is extremely frustrating. The lazy turnovers and the not getting to the offensive rebounding. Golden State's not a big team. You can't let them dominate the boards. That's not a way that you're going to possibly be able to win. And I know the Celtics ultimately won the rebounding battle, but in that third quarter, they got out-rebounded badly. And especially on the offensive glass, Sap. And in addition to that, we came into the series when we were previewing it, Zap, and saying, the Celtics are the more physical team than Golden State. Well, Golden State was more physical than you last night. And so if you're Boston, you can't allow that to happen. You can't allow Golden State to become the more physical team when you should have that advantage over them. And you allowed Golden State to out tough you and out physical you in that game. And that's something the Celtics hang their hats on. And it was absolutely Golden State was the more physical team last night, and the team that was putting in a more sincere effort. Now, listen, obviously Golden State had their backs against the wall, and it was almost a must-win game because you can't go down 2-0 and losing both home games. But the Celtics had a great opportunity in that game, and with maybe a little bit more of an effort in the third quarter, Sap, you have an interesting game. At the very least, I think that if you come out of that game, even if you lose it, if it's a close game, you really have Golden State still sweating. Instead, Golden State cruised, and I think they feel like, oh, we can take care of this Boston team, no problem. If you were able to take that game one, which they did, and then make game two competitive, I think you have Golden State really thinking, holy crap, we might not actually win this series. Whereas now they feel like, oh, game one was a total fluke. We can just go into Boston and dominate this team.
Isn't it strange, ironic, whatever word you want to use to describe it, that the Celtics won game one in a fashion where the officials didn't really get involved and it felt more like a skills contest, right? I mean, they were just so good from beyond the arc. They played an exquisite game in the fourth quarter. They scored 40 points. They dominated. And here are the Golden State Warriors winning game two, which felt more like a rock fight, right? It was a more physical, contested type game. You would think the Celtics would win the rock fight and that Golden State would win the skills contest. Well, it kind of flipped in the first two games of this series.
Yeah, I agree. It's a good point, Sap. It did. And, the Celtics should feel bad about themselves today, really, because not only did they get run out of the gym, but they let Golden State do a better version of the Celtics than what the Celtics did. And so I think that's really frustrating. Fortunately, I do feel like they have the right coach to call them out and say, hey, you guys suck tonight. I don't know what the hell the deal was. And these third quarters cannot become the third quarter of every single finals game. Because ultimately, listen, it's nice that they had that comeback in the fourth quarter in game one. But if this keeps being the trend in the third quarter, Sap, where they get blown out, they're going to lose this final series, period. You can't afford to be outscored by 20 plus points in a quarter and expect to win games. That's not a viable thing. So I think that there's a lot for the Celtics to talk about, and this stuff is fixable, fortunately. But it starts with not turning the ball over more, and then it followed up by a better effort. And obviously, you can't have guys like Marcus Smart and Rob Williams and Al Horford contribute 6 total points. That's not going to be a viable thing. And Smart, as and Horford as well, as they played in game one, were equally terrible in game two. Smart 5 assists, 5 turnovers. That's awful. Al Horford, 1 of 4 from the floor. Didn't even attempt a three, Sap, after hitting 6 in the first game. You said that he was guarded by Klay Thompson a lot. Well, my response to that is, if Al Horford's guarded by Klay Thompson, one, either shoot over him, you're taller than him, or two, take him down in the paint. And the Celtics just didn't adjust at all in that game, and I think that's a big reason they lost, is because in game one they did adjust, and in game two they did not.
Yeah, they just shot the ball better, obviously, in game one and game two. Although they started out really hot in game two, they were 10 of 19 from 3 in the first half. Mel looking at that saying, you should have a lead at this point. Instead, you're trailing by 2 because of all the turnovers. So many more possessions for Golden State. And again, those live ball turnovers turn into points. If you have an offensive foul, or if you sail a pass into the stands, well, then you have an opportunity to set your defense. When you're throwing a lazy cross-court pass that Draymond Green steals or Steph Curry steals, Golden State can get right into their offense, and next thing you know, someone's nailing an open three, whether it's Steph or whether it's Jordan Poole in the third quarter, who to me seems like the ultimate front runner. I mean, if Golden State has a 10-point lead, put that guy in there. He'll extend it to 20. I mean, if you think Scott Foster's the extender, I think Jordan Poole's the extender. But if you get Jordan Poole in a close game, his defensive liability is going to be shown. And I thought we saw that in game one. So take care of the basketball. And maybe get a 15-point lead at the half, because Golden State, look, this is something they've done for 8 years, where they dominate the third quarter. It's always been like that. Now, at times when you had Kevin Durant on the team, you just had more talent. So, you came out in the second half and they took it seriously and they blew doors. But it just seems like, whether it's Kerr making adjustments, but more likely that Curry, Thompson, and Draymond Green have just played together so long that they can do these adjustments on their own, on the fly, and they go from there, where they turn a close game into a blowout. And they did it again in game two, to the point where they outscored the Celtics by 21 points. So far in the first 2 games of this series, Jet, the Celtics have had a quarter where they outscored Golden State by 24 points, 40-16 in the fourth quarter of game one. Golden State came back in quarter 3 of game 2 and outscored the Celtics 35-14, outscoring them by 21 points. In fact, I believe Steph Curry scored as many points in the third quarter in game 2 as the Celtics did, 14 points. I think this all leads me to believe in this verbiage that I'm going with, is like a salad of way too many words, that these are both flawed teams. I mean, they're good teams. These aren't great teams. Someone's going to win the NBA championship this year. It's going to be one of these 2 teams. They're far from anything close to what Golden State was winning with Durant, or even the Lakers in the bubble a few years ago. Kind of like Phoenix and Milwaukee last year were both flawed teams and someone won. I think we're seeing 2 flawed teams that at times look like they're overmatched, as much because they have those flaws rather than the other team is that far superior to them. So it's going to be a fun series in that light.
Yeah, and now it's on the Celtics to adjust and to be able to respond from getting embarrassed. Golden State was obviously embarrassed in that fourth quarter in game one, and the Celtics need to respond. They have responded extremely well from losses. They haven't lost the game consecutive games in the postseason. It's been a while since they've lost consecutive games, so this is a team that's been able to rally back. But you're playing a different type of team in Golden State right now, and they just handed you your worst loss since I think January or February. So the Celtics can't just say, "Oh, we've responded really well from losses in the before. We'll just assume we're going to win this game." You got to take each game individually and adjust. And the things that they did wrong in game 2 are fixable, but they need to be able to put in a better effort, turn over the ball a lot less, and adjust on the fly a little bit better, like Golden State did, Sap. The things that Celtics did in game 1, especially in the fourth quarter, they didn't do in game 2. They let Kevon Looney get a lot of open dunks, which is just inexcusable. And when Jordan Poole is in and he's lighting it up from 3, they weren't challenging him on defense. Jordan Poole's a terrible defensive player, Sap. If he's in, you got to make him pay. defensively, and that's something they did in game one, and he was ineffective. And in game two, they didn't even try to challenge him, and he just sort of did whatever he wanted on offense. So a lot of stuff to look at, but plenty of stuff to fix. It is fixable, but it's certainly frustrating that the Celtics, I feel like, had an opportunity to really put their foot on the throat of the Warriors, and instead it seemed like they said, "Ah, well, we have one game in the bag. We did a split in Golden State. We should feel good about ourselves," and then just sort of punted in that second half of game two, and they're like, "Okay, we can leave here tied one and feel good at one game apiece and feel good about ourselves." Where that's not the right mentality in the finals at all, Sap.
No, you had an opportunity early to take control of this game, get a 2-0 lead, and really take control of this series. And now, best of five, you do have home court advantage, but Celtics haven't played really all that well at TD Garden in the last two series, and we know Golden State's quite capable of coming in here and winning a game. That's why I always felt that going into this, they were going to have to win at least 2 games in San Francisco to win this series. Now they only have 2 opportunities to win one. So it's going to be interesting. And again, these teams are both, well coached, good teams, play excellent defense, but they're both flawed. So it's just going to see who can hide their flaws better going forward. And I think the biggest takeaway I got from last night is Rob Williams is not right. It almost feels like you can count on him every other game. Like he was effective in game one. He wasn't effective in game two. Maybe he'll be effective in game three. We'll see what happens going forward with Rob Williams, because that is a big piece that they're missing. A guy that, who throughout the season was a 30 minutes per game guy, who was a great defender, who was also a contributor on offense with the lob. In game two, he was really actually a net negative because he wasn't helping you in any way, shape, or form. So that's a problem as well. But you're going to have to fight through that and see what he's going to be able to give you over the next game or two.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. Sap is he's I appreciate that he's gutting it out. It's the finals, and he wants to play, and I think that he showed in game one he can still be effective, even at whatever percentage he is. But you can't say we can't game plan on him being a big factor in it. You can't say, okay, we need Rob Williams to have a big game here. He's just not close to 100% enough to be able to say, all right, Rob Williams is going to be the X factor in this game. I do think at times he can give you some good minutes. He didn't last night, but in game one he did. But the Celtics need to assume that he's more likely than not going to not be able to, be super effective on the court, and they're going to play him in short spurts. But it's something that I think anybody with eyes can see he's not right. So I appreciate that he's gutting it out, and I do think that in short spurts he can be useful. But again, you can't rely on him right now with his health being what it is. But Sap, moving away from the NBA Finals, there is some NBA news, as there is always NBA news, regardless of what's going on. And that the Utah Jazz are now looking for a head coach, as their longtime coach Quin Snyder, surprisingly to some, resigned, and the ripple effects are already being talked about, as their star player Donovan Mitchell was taken really off guard and is apparently now very uncertain about his future in Utah. Somebody that's been, rumored for a while to leave Utah, as most players are, because it's such a small market. So Sap, a couple questions for you on the Quin Snyder front, because I think we both think he's a good coach. One, where does he end up? Two, what does this mean for the Jazz in terms of their coaching search and Donovan Mitchell? And three, from a Lakers perspective, they just hired Darvin Ham, and they just actually introduced him in a press conference today. He was a name that was talked about with the Lakers. Should the Lakers have waited to see what happened with this Quin Snyder situation now that he's available?
I'll go backwards on the 3 different
Sure,
questions we
please
have.
do.
Because again, as an old person, I remember the third question.
And I'll remember them
fresher in
for
my
you. I
memory.
can ask you again.
There you go. That's what happens. But by the time we get, a minute into this, I'll say, what was the second point? Darvin Ham, I think, is a good choice. I'm happy with that. And I think Quin Snyder is a good coach, but I think Darvin Ham will fit with what the Lakers want to do. I think he wanted to go to someone who played in the league, or at least, has been an assistant coach on a championship caliber team in Milwaukee, has kind of a presence about him being a big guy. I think it was a good move. So I'm happy that the Lakers went with Darvin Ham. And you never know what's going to happen at that point, if someone else is going to reach out to Darvin Ham and hire him. I know Charlotte's looking for a coach. We'll see what other teams decide to move on from their current coaches. So Darvin Ham was going to be a hot coaching candidate. So when you had the opportunity to hire him, go ahead and do that. So I was quite happy with Darvin Ham, and I think that if they had waited, you don't know what's going to happen. But it was a surprise that Quin Snyder decided to resign. As far as Donovan Mitchell, he's been rumored to the Knicks forever. He's from that area, grew up a Knicks fan. His dad worked for the Mets. What exactly would the Knicks have to send back to Utah for Donovan Mitchell? I would think Julius Randle would have to be part of that.
RJ Barrett. I don't know if they want to do that though.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and look, the Knicks they had one good year in the last 10, right? I mean, they made it to the playoffs. They got knocked out by Atlanta in 5 games, and the Garden was rocking, and it's a great market and a great fan base, but they just can't seem to get out of their own way. And obviously, old Italian adage, and I think every culture has it: the fish stinks from the head down. So that's Jim Dolan, who runs the team, one of the worst owners in all of sports. I think that Donovan Mitchell wants out. I know the connection with Utah is that Dwayne Wade is a minority owner there, and that was Donovan Mitchell's favorite player, but that only means so much, right? At some point, that's going to wear off for Donovan Mitchell, that, his idol owns 2% of the Utah Jazz. He's going to
how often is he in Utah anyways, Dwayne Wade?
Exactly. Yeah, I don't think Dwayne Wade's hanging out in Utah all that much. It's not like he's 2% owner of the Lakers where you'd see him at every game. I also just think that when we look into this, like, what does Danny Ainge have to do with this?
That's right? The big factor for me. Yeah.
He's running things in Utah. So is he already pissed off Quin Snyder? Is Quin Snyder and Danny Ainge not, simpatico? And Quin Snyder just said, well, let me just move on. And I think ultimately Quin Snyder's probably going to maybe take a year off, which isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, it's the end of the coaching cycle, so it seems like.
Yeah, take a year off, and then next year you'll have your pick of a better job. Maybe Brooklyn opens up. And well, if you want that job to deal with Kyrie, but maybe that opens up when Steve Nash. The Knicks could be another one, because we know Thibodeau only lasts so long.
Again, if you want that job too.
If you want that job too, but then again, maybe Donovan Mitchell's on his way to New York, so ends up being some sort of package deal. Donovan Mitchell and Quin Snyder.
So Philadelphia is another possibility that could open up too.
Yeah, he's a good coach without question. Look, I think over the last 8 years, the Utah Jazz have the best record in the Western Conference over this 8-year period, and they've
what do they have to show for
the finals.
That's the thing.
I think Colin Cowherd said this on his show today or yesterday, that they're kind of become like the Green Bay Packers. They're always there, but they can't quite break through because they don't really attract free agents. Like, who wants to play in Salt Lake City, or who the hell wants to play in Green Bay, Wisconsin?
Right.
So they can only go so far. So I think Quin Snyder will resurface, but perhaps he takes a year off. And these guys have plenty of money saved for all the years they've coached. It's not like they need the job.
So, Sap, ultimately, Utah, it's of interest to me, and I think to you too, because we experienced the Danny Ainge thing for almost 20 years here in Boston, and he is a fascinating GM, because sometimes he's wheeling and dealing, other times he's hoarding draft picks like they're gold. But he does have an experience with 2 teardowns, where he tore down the Celtics when he first got there. The Antoine Walker, Paul Pierce version. He tore that thing down to basically just Paul Pierce. And then again, when the Pierce, Garnett, Ray Allen era was over, he tore down that. Obviously, the Celtics are seeing the fruits of that labor now, with Tatum and Brown being the prize for trading those guys. So do you see Ainge doing a teardown in Utah? And we talked a lot about his health, Sap, when he was with the Celtics. He had heart issues. He's not the youngest guy in the world anymore. Does he want to do a teardown? Is he going to do a teardown? What do you think happens in Utah now?
It seems like that's in his DNA, right? He likes to do that. Then he reconstructs the team. And I think Danny Ainge knows talent. There's no question about that. Look at his drafts for the most part, especially the last 6-7 years. He nailed the drafts. I mean, Aaron Nesmith and Romeo Langford were misses. But other than that, look, he got Rob Williams late in the first round, Peyton Pritchard late in the first round, Grant Williams was a nice piece, got him around 18th in the first round. So, I mean, he knows how to draft. The Brown and Tatum ones, clearly home runs. Marcus Smart was a good draft choice at number 6 in 2014. He knows how to draft. He knows talent. He knew to go get Kyrie Irving, sign Gordon Hayward, sign Al
Horford. Yeah.
Horford, Kemba Walker, although that was kind of a miss because of the knee, and maybe they should have done more research on Kemba's knee. And ultimately, he obviously was trying to get Kevin Durant. Look, I could have been the general manager and had the great idea of signing Kevin Durant as a free agent, and I'm an idiot. I mean, I'm not going to give him credit for that one, and it didn't actually happen. It failed, and then obviously his master plan was to get Anthony Davis, which would have backfired in a sense, because believe me, New Orleans would have wanted Brown and Tatum for Anthony Davis, right? Because look what the Lakers had to give New Orleans for Anthony Davis. They had to give Brandon Ingram and Lonzo Ball, who came into the league the same year that Tatum and Brown came into the year, and actually were drafted one spot ahead of Tatum and Brown. That's what would have taken to get Anthony Davis. I love when people go, well, Jaylen Brown would have got Anthony Davis. No, he wouldn't have. No, not in 2018, 2019. Anthony Davis was an elite player, and we don't know how good Brown and Tatum were going to be at that point. We thought they'd be good, but you would have had to part with both of those guys for Anthony Davis. Would that have kept Kyrie Irving here? Be honest with you, at this point, I would have preferred Tatum and Brown over Davis and Irving. I'm not going to get into the talent level. It's just those guys seem committed, whereas at times I think Kyrie and Anthony Davis,
so unreliable. The other two.
Well, I think they should be committed at times, especially Kyrie Irving. So yeah, they're more reliable, Tatum and Brown. So even that deal didn't happen, it worked out okay for the Celtics. Heck, they're in the finals, tied one game apiece with Golden State. So I think that's kind of what he likes to do, Danny Ainge. But again, he's 64 with those health issues, but he's back home where he's really comfortable in Utah. He's very close to the ownership group there. I mean, they're going to let him do whatever he wants. So I think that's probably what he's going to do. Does he send Donovan Mitchell to the Knicks? I don't know. For what? A bevy of draft picks?
He loves draft picks.
He loves draft picks. But you're also going to have to match up the salaries, right? So, is it Julius Randle, RJ Barrett, draft picks? I don't know. And again, I think Mitchell's an outstanding player. I don't think he's quite the guy you move heaven and earth for.
Yeah,
right?
The other team that I've heard for him is Miami.
They're always in there too. Yeah.
In which case, they'd have to give up Tyler Hero, but I don't know after that, his playoff run, I don't know that that's going to get it done, anymore. I think Tyler Hero's stock has taken a pretty significant ding.
Yeah, I mean, Bam Adebayo, but do you really want to? And how's that going to fit with Rudy Gobert? With Utah going to go with two bigs? Although Bam Adebayo is versatile enough.
One of those guys is going though, right? At this offseason, wouldn't you imagine Gobert or Mitchell? At least one, maybe both.
Yeah, because they don't get along. And
right,
if you're exceptional talents, you can get.
Well, it doesn't work. Obviously, they haven't.
It just doesn't work either. No, and Gobert is a guy who's won Defensive Player of the Year 3 times, and I don't think he's that great a defender. I think they just kept giving him the award because he would lead the league in blocks or whatever. And every time I saw him play against an elite center, they'd eat him up, whether it was Jokic or Embiid. Embiid had like 42 on him one night this year. I mean, it's like he didn't really stop anybody. And if Mitchell wants out, you're going to have to move him and get as much as you can. Yeah, and then you go into a full rebuild because you can't really get free agents there. It's just not the place where free agents are going. So you have to build through the draft and trades. And Ainge is good at that stuff if he decides to make trades. He stopped making trades here. Every year at the deadline, they wouldn't make a move. And that was a problem. And he's great at knowing talent. Yeah, he knows talent. But I don't know if he knows roster construction. Whereas I think Brad Stevens kind of understood. Brad Stevens kind of understood roster construction better than Danny Ainge, and he was a novice at this. I think Brad Stevens is good at that because that's how he had to build his roster at Butler. He couldn't just go out and recruit 5-star recruits. He had to kind of fit pieces together, and I think he kind of learned on the fly to do that even in the NBA.
And we have no idea if Brad Stevens can draft because the Celtics have since, he's traded all of his picks since he's been general manager. So they haven't had the opportunity to even draft. So, and this year they don't have a pick. So it's going to be a while till we make a determination on if he can evaluate talent at the collegiate ranks. But I agree with you. He might understand roster construction better, but it's interesting, a team that's been so competitive over the past couple of years, Sap in Utah, looks like things are falling apart there and they're going to be in for a rebuild. And obviously when you're talking about all-star caliber players like Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert, where they end up could shift the balance of the NBA depending on, where they end up. If it's New York, okay, it's really not going to make that big of a difference. If a team like, Brooklyn trades for Rudy Gobert, that's something that I heard bandied about. Okay, well, that could have ripple impacts on the league. We'll have to see. But it's worth noting that with the departure of Quin Snyder, that it seems more likely than not that Utah team is not going to look anything like what they've looked like the past couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, and there's going to be a million rumors right from now till the middle of July. I mean, one rumor I saw was the Lakers involved with sending Russell Westbrook to the Knicks for Julius Randle and Evan Fournier. Well, Fournier would fit with LeBron because he's a really good shooter, but he's a weak defender. Randall's not a really good defender. He played for the Lakers. You'd get him back. And Westbrook would be a guy the Knicks could sell, as a sideshow. He's
Again,
an
I don't know why
player
anybody's trading for freaking Russell Westbrook right now.
I don't
why
get
are you
it,
doing
but
the Lakers the favor? That's what I look at it as.
Take your green colored glasses off. I mean, as long as there's one team out there that wants him, then you can trade him. I wouldn't trade for him, but I've never been a big Russell Westbrook fan. But again, if you're
I have, and I wouldn't trade for him either. So.
Right. Yeah. At this point, he's just, again, I think his best bet is to go to a place where the pressure isn't on him and he goes out and averages a triple double and everybody falls in love with him and it has no impact on winning. Because that's kind of what he did in Washington, kind of what he did in Houston, kind of what he did in Oklahoma City. I mean, once Durant left, they were really never title contenders. When's the last time Russell Westbrook was really on a title contender? I mean, it was supposed to be the Lakers this past season, but obviously it didn't materialize. They couldn't even make it to the play-in tournament. I mean, the last time Russell Westbrook played in anything meaningful in the postseason was in 2016 when they had a 3-1 lead over Golden State, and he effed it up the last 3 games, as did Durant, by the way. Both of those guys played poorly in games 5, 6, and 7. It's just that Westbrook took more shots than Durant, which should never be the case. But yeah, I mean, there'll be a million rumors out there over the next month, which is why the NBA is so fascinating. Boy, frankly, the NFL as well, too, because we saw what the offseason was like for the NFL with quarterbacks moving all over the place. Deshaun Watson going from Houston to Cleveland, Russell Wilson going from Seattle to Denver. I mean, we never used to see that. That was insanity. This year was great. Brady retiring, coming back. Rodgers, not sure what the hell he was going to do, then coming back. We see that now in the NFL like the NBA, but the NBA is going to be crazy because I think a lot of teams now feel, Jet, that they're close enough to contend, right? Because they see, well, Golden State turned it around quickly in 2 years. The Celtics were a 500 team last year. They turned it around.
At this point in the season, they were a 500 team at one point in the season.
Yeah. So I think that it's not like, I mean, there was about a 4-year stretch where I think every team in the league was like, what's the point? LeBron's going to win the East.
Yep.
And actually, this is the first time I've mentioned him in the show, Jet. So
good. Wow.
Credit for that. I mean, we're like 42 minutes into it.
Yeah, we're about to wrap up. That's impressive, Sap. Congratulations.
I was trying to hold off.
New record.
But I'm like Joe DiMaggio. The streak continues. But actually, it's more like Cal Ripken, 26-32.
I know. Yeah, you've blown out DiMaggio's streak way out of the water.
That a long time ago. I'm approaching Cal Ripken's streak. I mean, how many podcasts we've done? About 200 podcasts. I've mentioned him in every one, deservedly so. But there was
we're still behind the Skip Bayless's show. In terms of them. Streak, that streak's at infinity.
No one is catching them. But LeBron was going to win the East, and Golden State was going to win the West. So like every other team is like, what's the point? Now, the last few years, it's been wide open, right? Because Toronto won the championship with a 1-year. One and done with Kawhi Leonard, and then the Lakers won in the bubble with defense, and then Milwaukee won with defense, and was a surprise over a Phoenix team no one expected to get to the final. So it's more wide open now than ever. Like we said at the beginning of this podcast, the 2 teams left are really good teams, well coached, play good defense, all of that, but they're flawed. These aren't awesome teams like Golden State was for 4 or 5 years, especially when they had Durant, or the way the Heat were with LeBron and Wade and Bosh. I mean, it's more wide open. So now all these other teams are going to say, man, if we can just tweak things, we can get back in there. Even the Lakers, even though they missed the play-in tournament, I mean, LeBron and Anthony Davis healthy, they tweak that roster, they can contend.
Yeah, they just have a hard time tweaking it because they have that,
true
anvil looming over their heads with Russell Westbrook's contract. So it's
and no draft picks, no draft picks,
no draft picks,
future either.
Yeah, but you're right, and I think that's great for the league, honestly, where every team, you want fan bases. What sells tickets and what drives TV revenue is fan bases having hope. And, if you have a lot of teams that have hope of potentially winning a championship or turning things around, then your product is in really good shape. And so the NBA, I think, remains in good shape because of that parity. And We'll have to see, what other rumors crop up, Sap, and how we're obviously going to react to all these games in the finals here. And we just love talking about basketball. So the league's in great shape right now. But that's going to do it for us here at the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap. Thanks to Full Press Coverage. Make sure you check out our social medias at JohnSap25, at Jet Stryer for all the latest on the show and other musings going around. And type in the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, and you can find the show wherever podcasts are found. We will talk to you after game 3, everybody. See you then.